we are taught from the beginning not to deviate from off-label uses on supplies, on equipment, on procedures, on treatments, and they're right. We cannot deviate from that. But that is not to say that we cannot innovate in areas that we do see a healthcare gap that needs to be addressed.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Rosa DiDonato.
And I'm Marian Leary.
And you're listening to Amplify Nursing, a Penn nursing podcast supported by the Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Amplify Nursing features nurses who are leading the way in science, policy, and innovation.
Our guests defy stereotypes, define practice, and disrupt convention.
We highlight the breadth and depth of nursing influence on society by amplifying nurses who are pushing boundaries and breaking down barriers to build a new paradigm.
Today on Amplify Nursing, we talk to Ernesto Holguin, a clinical nurse, innovator, and entrepreneur. Ernesto creates solutions to everyday clinical problems with his team at Oten Medical. He shares with us the inspiration for his work, the challenges of developing a new product, and his entry into nursing through a very unusual route, the U.S. Army Marching Band.
Thank you so much for talking with us today. I am super excited to be speaking with you.
Well, thank you, Marian. Thank you for inviting me.
So let's just set the stage a little. Can you give a little background on who you are and the work that you're currently doing right now?
Sure. I'm Ernesto Holguin. I'm from El Paso, Texas. I've been a nurse for 25 years, and I'm still currently a dialysis clinical coordinator for 2 hospitals in El Paso, Texas. And I've been innovating since 2014, but really thinking closely on since the beginning of 2004. And right now, my company is at a path where we're going to be bringing on 2 products to market. We already have one in existence. It's the IV and ventilator tube holder, which we call the I-Lines. And the second one is the CPAP hose holder for home use. And that product is going to start beginning or in the middle of next month, February.
So that's super exciting. And I definitely want to talk more about that in a little bit. But I want to get a better sense of how you got into nursing and what your path was to becoming a nurse innovator and entrepreneur. So take us back. Like, what was it that led you to nursing?
Well, that's a very interesting story because it went from one day to the next on that decision. So I played the trumpet throughout high school, and I was pretty good at it. I played in jazz band, marching band, stage band. Received the Louis Armstrong Jazz Award my senior year. And one day, a recruiter went to go visit us, and they asked us if we wanted to continue a band in the military, the Army band. And that's what I wanted to do. And they asked us to go meet with them at the recruiting office. And I did. I took the test, and they called me in for the results. Well, I had scored really high on my entry test, ASVAB, that they offered me nursing instead of marching band or Army band. And I really didn't want to go into nursing, but I had a really good recruiter, Sergeant Kirby. And he set me aside and he goes, "You're never going to forget this. You're not going to regret this. I think you need to go into nursing. And after you graduate, you're going to come back and bring me a dozen roses thanking me. You're not going to regret it." So I thought about it and I said, okay, let's go into licensed practical nurse course. So I let go of the Army the Army band at that point, and went into going into the EMT, the combat medic program, and then later on the licensed practical nurse program. And that's where I started my nursing career.
I had no idea you could be recruited into the Army for band. That is like,
Hmm.
I don't know, just nothing that has ever occurred to me. I find that fascinating. And I love talking with all of our nursing colleagues and the folks that we interview on this podcast and learning about all of their creativity and other extracurriculars that they do that I think really infuse into who they are as nurse innovators and practitioners. And the fact that you play the trumpet, and I've heard you play the trumpet before, I think is really interesting and only adds to your skills as a nurse innovator in the way that you think about problems. And please correct me if I'm wrong on that assumption.
No, you're right. It's a different skill set that you have when you play music, when you're creative, artistic way. Even with language, you use a different part of your brain. Now with nursing, I really don't know what part of the brain you use, but it's more of a cognitive, more creative thinking, critical thinking. I'm guessing it's around the same path where those two cross. But artistically, definitely, I was very into the band and playing the instrument. That it did help in the sense where you try different things, like the octaves, the scales, and everything that you play with music. So some of them must have passed over when I went into nursing.
Yeah, and I mean that's why I love nursing because you do get to use both sides of your brain, right? You have to be super creative, but there's also that analytical part that's needed as well. So, did you ever end up bringing your instructor those 12 roses?
I did. I went looking for him, Sergeant Kirby, and to the recruiting center. I went to see if he was there first, and he had retired maybe a few months after he enlisted me into the Army. But I will never forget his name and how he guided me into nursing, and I'm always very appreciative. And if Sergeant Kirby, if you're listening to this, I'm Ernesto Holguin. You recruited me back in El Paso, Texas in 1993, and I want to thank you for that.
So it sounds like it was the right decision then.
Definitely, it was the right decision. And my persona is such where I do care about others. I do care about my patients, and it just fit in with our nursing profession. The nursing, what we have to deal on a daily basis, it's very exhausting. You sometimes do get emotionally drained, and sometimes when you get home you don't continue that nursing feeling with your children and wife. But I do. I still continue with caring for others. So I think the nursing profession fits me well.
So, how long were you in the Army, and did you then do nursing as an Army? I don't even know the term. Army officer, Army.
I was enlisted, right? I was a NCO by the time I left the Army. I did 3 years active and 6 years active reserves, and I went up to E5 sergeant ranking. So I was able to lead a squad of 6 other nurses, and our mission was to support the hospital, Beaumont Hospital here in El Paso. So we were a evac hospital, and we worked in the ICU setting. So I was in charge of 6 other nurses in the ICU setting.
What was your path after the military?
I began my associate's degree at our local community college, and I utilized my GI Bill. And at that point, I was working as an LPN at a nursing home between the breaks, the summer breaks, holiday breaks, trying to earn as much money as I could, and then use that money on top of the GI Bill to go to nursing school full time. And my mom helped a great deal with that. She let me stay at her home rent free. She fed me, did everything that a mom does, and and I'm very grateful for my mother doing that. If not, I wouldn't been able to go into nursing school. And I received my associate's degree, and thereafter I I continued with my bachelor's. But my daughter was born in '96, Cassandra, and it was near to impossible to go attend in person schooling. So I ended up going into the online coursing at University of Phoenix, and it took me 8 years, but I finally reached my BSN.
I love that. I love listening to the different journeys that people take to their degree programs. 8 years to get a BSN, I think that's incredible. And all the way, you're getting amazing life experience, especially in the military. And I think it's really important for people to understand that there's not just one path into nursing, but multiple paths for multiple people.
That's correct. It was um, very difficult, many obstacles, but I knew I needed to continue with my education.
So, at what point did you start thinking about creating solutions to the problems that you were seeing in your practice? When did that begin?
It was back in 2004, and I ended up picking up a patient that was regular. She would often go to the hospital, and very nice lady, lovely lady with a good family support. And I asked her what happened, and she responded in Spanish. I have a foot ulcer. And I knew the family, I knew the husband, the kids, they're very supportive. And I asked them, didn't your husband check your feet? Didn't your children check your feet? And she proceeded saying that, husband diabetic, he can't see himself, he can't feel. Children busy at work, and having their own children, it takes up their time. Plus, they weren't there after she would shower, so they weren't there for when she would do her own dressing changes and her care. And then I asked her, well, if you didn't know, if you didn't feel, if you didn't see, how did you know you had a foot ulcer? And then she said, I smelled it. And at that point, my heart sank, and I thought, we need to do something about this. This is um, horrific. How can a person go through two senses before they find out that they have a foot ulcer, or before they find out anything's wrong, beyond their reach?
So,
And that
sorry, Ernesto. So, talk a little bit about, for our listeners who might not understand, what it means for a diabetic patient to get a foot ulcer and why that's such a problem.
with diabetes, it affects every cell in your body and slowly starts deteriorating. The cells that allow you to see better, so that's why they go into poor vision. They also extend the healing process on wounds due to high levels of sugar levels in your bloodstream that feed into the bacteria, and the bacteria just proliferates, and it's very difficult to heal a wound. Now, having those two combined, poor vision, poor sensory, also due to diabetes, if they have a little scratch, a little rock in their foot and their sock, and it rubs, it breaks the skin, it gets infected. You and I would be like, oh, let's take the rock off. Let me put some medicine there. With them, they don't know the little rock is there. So it gets worse. The wound gets worse. And the infection just grows at a very rapid pace than if you didn't have diabetes. And that's the problem that we see with our patients, is that they get a little cut, they get infected, they physically see their doctor sees it, sends them to the hospital, they get treated, and then they don't see the doctor for another month and a half. And if they don't continue the proper care at home, which usually if you can't see your wound, you're not going to take care of your wound. The next doctor visit, the wound gets worse, and then they get sent back to the hospital. And that's where I would see them coming back worse and worse all the way until they had, cellulitis. They had sepsis. They were going to have amputations. And every time the wound got worse, the treatment was more intense. Instead of getting antibiotics by mouth and a simple, wet to dry dressing or simple dressings, now they're getting IV antibiotics, and now they're doing wound debridement. So it intensifies every time the progression of the wound, and it's done something that inevitable with patients that continue coming back to the hospital for those reasons, and it's just a circular rotation where they just come back worse and worse.
And so you were seeing this over and over again. What tipped you to think, okay, I have to come up with a solution? And how did you then think about what that solution could be?
Okay, well, I started doing some customer discovery. And this is what we nurses do. We dig into their lifestyle, their activities of daily living, what's keeping them from properly looking at their feet, the care that continues away from the hospital, the continuation that has to happen. And I started receiving the same obstacles that people face and commonalities. And then I started asking my wound care colleagues, the nurses, okay, you see this happening. Why do you think this is happening? And they would say the same thing. Poor management at home, and patients having these disabilities that just make it worse. And then I started asking, well, is there a device that monitors them once they get discharged? And is there a device that takes, images or communicates that information to the physician? And they said, no, there's no such device. And that's where I started thinking of ideas, daydreaming, how I would build my machine in order to accommodate that problem in our healthcare delivery. And that's where I started looking into my first patent.
So, did you have any background or experience with building products? Like, how did you feel confident that you could take this idea and start to move it forward in that way?
I didn't, Marianne, at first, to be honest. It was an idea that I had. I did know that I needed to patent the idea in order to safeguard my device in order to make sure the patients benefit the fullest from it. And that I didn't know what to do. But building, prototyping didn't pop into my head at first. Not until in the summer of 2015, maker nurse from MIT visited my hospital, and they were looking for maker nurses and wanted to speak to whoever was interested. Well, being a dialysis nurse, we are always busy in the unit. And at that point, luckily, I had a copy of my patent with me. And my director knew all the pains and frustrations I had gone through with the patent process, and he called me down and introduced me to the maker nurses. And that's where they encouraged me to prototype, to continue on my own. And of course, there was many obstacles. I had no clue in prototyping, no clue in computer programming or electronics, any of that. And I've been a nurse for so many years that was my comfort zone. I never dabbled with anything other than that. But they did help. There was a brilliant engineer that taught computer coding, and he helped me to establish my first interface on the computer program, and we utilized Raspberry Pi, and that's how I started with the prototyping. And they said, just get things that you have, go to Lowe's, pick up stuff, and start building, and that's what I did.
Can you talk a little bit about the patent process for folks who are listening who might not know what that entails, what processes did you have to go through to get your patent, and how long did it take?
Well, the patent was very extensive, and after drawing ideas on paper, um, from there on, I didn't know where to go. I searched locally to see if there was any patent attorneys in El Paso, and I didn't find any. And then I came across a commercial invention home mentioning, patenting your idea and selling. So I did communicate them, and we signed on for a year. And they also had a platform where they would pitch your idea to companies, and then they would give you feedback. But the thing was that they couldn't tell you who they were pitching to, which I didn't like at that point, and lasted only 1 year, so I didn't renew my contract with them. But one thing that did come out of that was that I was able to speak with their patent attorneys, their 3D designers, engineers, and we worked towards the patent, my first patent. And that's how I began my patent process with my utility patent with a company from New York.
Are there resources that you would recommend? So if there are other nurses out there who have ideas and want to figure out how to either take it to the next level, either with a patent or protect their intellectual property, things like that, are there resources that you've used that you would recommend?
Yes, there's plenty of resources that I later found out that existed. There's databases throughout the United States that uh, will show you if there's a patent pending or there's an existing patent closest to what you're thinking of. So you could also do Google patents and do a quick search, and it'll save you a huge headache and money and investment if you do this. Make sure there's nothing out there that exists first. Once you do that vetting process, then you need to realize what your starting goal is and your end goal is. You're going to face many obstacles. There's going to be a lot of bumps on the road, and you need to determine if you're willing to continue and follow through to the very end. If the answer is yes, then you start the process. If the answer is no, then that's where it ends. It's not easy. It's very difficult, and you need to be true to yourself in order to continue. So that's the process that I would begin with. Once you want to continue with your patent process, then speak to others. Of your idea, make sure you do get a NDA involved. If you're working by yourself, then you need to look at the ways to the legality of it. If you're working with others, if you're working with a university, you need to be well aware of what you're gonna, if you're gonna have to share your patent with somebody else, the percentage, if that's going to be feasible for yourself. And there's so many ways that you could go about it, and you just have to pick the right choice on that. And then once you get past that point, then that's when you draw up your conclusions. You do a proof of concept, make sure that you have the audience, you have the customers, and you have a way for reimbursement on your device, if it is a medical device, because at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how well you're going to, make money in order to continue to sustain yourself. And there's one piece of advice that I tell everyone I meet is that, if persevere, don't let one thing stop you, and you need to find creative ways to go around it and overcome. And if there's a way of doing things, you'll find it. It's just going to take time.
So you got your patent and you started a company. Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like now that you have this company, you have this patent, and where your products are at?
Sure. Began my company in December of 2017, and it was due to assistance from a local uh, innovation program, the Medical Center of the Americas here in El Paso. I entered a competition. I won some seed money and free dry lab space. They also offer business classes, which were well needed. I didn't know much. I didn't know anything about business, and they brought in guest speakers, CPAs, lawyers, patent attorneys, and it it built a good foundation, and it led me into opening up my business. Now, at first, with the diabetic remote monitoring system, it was going fairly well. We had finished the patent, we were doing the prototyping. Uh, we did get as far as possible with the drying and the automatic sensors turning on, and everything that you need to do to transcribe the images to selective emails that you want to send it to. The next step after that would have been turnkey manufacturing, where they would actually work on the front and back end of your product, do the blueprints, produce a few prototypes for you, and then from there on continue with the research and FDA route. Well, at that point, we hit a wall. The amount of investment was very significant, to the point where we would cause a rift in our personal finances. So at that point, we pivoted to two other ideas that I had, and you may want to call these the low hanging fruit ideas. And the first one was intravenous and ventilator tube holder. And the problem with the ICU setting is that the IV lines are everywhere. They're spaghetti lines. They're close to the floor. They're dangling. They're wedged in between the mattress and the side rail. And the ventilator tubes, they do have a bracket that's non-mobile. So every time the head of the bed goes up and down, the tube gets pulled, and then it disengages, or it causes a gag reflex for the intubated patient. So I designed a device that would actually adhere to the any part of the side rail you wish to have it slide in the IV lines and the ventilator tube and organize and hold them. So this does two things. It keeps it in organized and in nurses' view. And nurses are meticulously, organized. We're very, very organized people, and this works very well with our character. Well, we had that manufactured. We filled some orders, and in that process, we also found out that during the COVID crisis, it also helped guide the IV lines outside the patient's room. If the nurses are running the IV pumps outside the COVID rooms, this keeps it away from the floor, organized, and the nurses are able to manipulate the IV pumps outside, changing the antibiotics, changing the vasopressors outside. And we found out that this also helped reduce the PPE usage, and also staff exposure. So there's a hospital in Texas that utilizes our products, and with that being said, the COVID putting such a budget constraint with all the hospital settings, we saw a slowdown on those sales due to the fact that they're gearing more into the PPE and the staff. A lot of staff burnout. There's a lot of overtime, and that's what hospitals are doing right now. They're concentrating on that. And hopefully, once there's less of a budget constraint, then we'll be able to continue with those sales. And now the other product that we're working on is the CPAP hose holder. And it actually came out of a version of the eye line when we did multiple versions, we did quite a bit of extensive 3D printing. And that's the cool part about 3D printing. You could 3D print, you could test it, you could change it, you could go back and forth. And we did over 60 changes to the 3D print for the eyeline. And in one of those versions, my COO Rob Sanchez and I, we know the space, we knew the CPAP space, and we started thinking this would be a great device for the CPAP, but at home use. And that's where we brought that other product into life. And we did product questionnaires with actual patients utilizing the CPAP machines. We gathered their information. We changed the CPAP design to meet their general needs, and we 3D printed it. And now we're to the point where we're in close to manufacturing it and assembly, and we should have that product out in the market by the middle of next month, February of 2021.
That's really exciting. I love talking to you and listening to your story because it's filled with ups and downs, right? Like you have this great idea for the diabetic foot ulcer device, but it's not feasible financially, and so you pivot to this other, like you describe it, low hanging fruit, and then because of COVID, that sort of knocks that out of contention, and then you move on to this other idea. And I think that really highlights what it takes to be an innovator and entrepreneur, especially during a pandemic. But I'm curious to get your take on what you think it's like being in this field that you're in now, and if you would encourage other nurses to jump in.
It's a beautiful field. The nursing profession is very rewarding, and if I can, I'll plan to stay until I retire in the nursing profession. Now, with encouraging other nurses to innovate, it has to be a labor of love. First of all, you need to look at the end user, not really at the monetary gains that you're going to see, and you need to be cost responsible and also be aware that this is going to be applied to the masses, because your product that you're going to invent has to help the people that are underserved, that are neglected, ill. Those are the people that we need to work with. Now, innovating for myself, I do have an advantage over others. I feel I do have an advantage due to the fact that I still continue working a full-time job, and I'm doing this on the side, and that's where family support comes in. But I don't have the stress that I have to make a paycheck in order to continue living. Uh, Therefore, I don't make rash decisions on my company, on my patents, on my devices. I'm able to sustain myself and continue. And that's something I do recommend to all the nurses that are wanting to innovate. Don't put yourself in a financial strain where you're not going to be able to continue with your idea. You have to find that path, and coordinating that with your spouse, your significant other. It's extremely important, and you need to make a plan before you continue.
I'm really glad you brought up the family support because I know your family has been a big part of the work that you're doing. So, you could take the time now to give a shout out to whomever you would like in your family who has supported you along the way.
Now, it's one person comes into mind, and she's my wife, and Yvonne. She's been there since the beginning. My crazy ideas, I call them, and my wild dreams. And the very first one, the diabetic remote monitoring system, it was to the point where I needed to make that initial investment with Invention Home. So I asked her, I explained everything, and I gave her the finances, and she's a trooper without hesitancy. She's like, let's do this. Yeah, go for it. And that support not only comes in emotional and loving support, but it also comes in with uh, redirecting our family in order to help me continue with my path. So we did quite a bit of sacrifices and struggles. Um, our family vacations were mixed with my pitch competitions away from El Paso. The days that I gave up to go to business classes were taken away from my family time, and my wife did do such a wonderful job with that, um, and she's instrumental to my success. I would have to say that I wouldn't be able to do this without her. And the children, my kids are wonderful, and they were well taken care of. I never heard one time my kids complain about me being away. And I thank my wife for that.
Well, Ernesto, it is always a pleasure talking with you. Is there anything else you would like to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, for all those maker nurses out there, I understand if you are a little afraid to continue with your project. We are taught from the beginning not to deviate from off-label uses on supplies, on equipment, on procedures, on treatments, and they're right. We cannot deviate from that. But that is not to say that we cannot innovate in areas that we do see a healthcare gap that needs to be addressed. But we need to do it in a responsible way and do your due diligence. And saying that, you have to bring your idea to light, first of all, and share that information with others. Gather information, do some proof of concept, maybe some prototyping, see how well it's going to work and how well it's going to be effective without compromising the safety of your patient. If you have all the green lights in all those areas, then continue, because the engineer does excellent work with the specifics, but the ideas come from nurses. We nurses are the ones that are touching the patients. We're the discipline that are nursing the patients. We see what works, what doesn't work, and we shouldn't be afraid to speak up for the patient's sakes and for the evolution of our nursing profession. So I do encourage you nurses not to give up and persevere with your idea.
One more thing I just want to say, if folks want to check out your company, where can they find you?
People that are interested in learning more about the IV and ventilator tube holder and the CPAP hose holder, they could visit my company at otenmedical.com.
Great. And we'll make sure to link that on our website as well.
Thank you, Marian.
Hello, Angela.
Hello, Marian. How are you?
I'm fabulous. I just had such a fun conversation with Ernesto, who I've known for a couple years now because we featured him as one of our case study nurse innovators in our Design Thinking for Health platform, which, for those who don't know, is a free online open access platform that teaches about nursing innovation and design thinking.
Yeah, his story was so fascinating about how he got into nursing through the Army via the Army band. Who knew that was a thing? Right. And that, I know, right? And then,
so cool.
Seeing all of these patients come in, constantly having complications with wounds and, starting to develop a system to help people take care of their wounds at home when they're not able to otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, and his persistence over the years. So I've had 2 startup companies. Neither were very successful, but I learned a lot, especially how much time, energy, and resources it takes to create and like I said, not even successful, to create a startup. I can't even imagine what it must take to create a successful startup. And so, his persistence and his ability to pivot and look for other opportunities, I just find really amazing.
Yes. And I think that it's fantastic too, that he's finding really practical solutions for in the moment things that, are helping, ICU nurses with, ventilator tubing. And, I saw on his website, they're looking at CPAP hoses, like a carrier for CPAP hoses. Like, this is just, it's like quality of life, common sense, really, really helpful stuff.
Right. And that's why nurses should be doing these things, why they should be taking their ideas and making them an actual product or process. It's why they should be at the table for all of these innovation meetings that health systems have. And it's why they should be taking their ideas and starting companies. Nurses are at the bedside. They see these practical needs that patients and health systems have. And it's really important for nurses to know. And Ernesto is a great example of this, that even if you don't think you have the background or experience to do these things, you actually can and should be.
Amplify Nursing is hosted by Dr. Angela Rosa DiDonato and Marion Leary, and produced by the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, with special thanks to our Department of Information Technology Services for their assistance. Music for the podcast was created by Harper Leary. The podcast is made possible by the Krista and Rich Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Follow us on Twitter at Penn Nursing. Until next time, keep pushing over, under, around, and through. We want to thank you for listening to the Amplify Nursing podcast and remind you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening. And if you can, please do us a solid and rate and review us as well. It will go a long way in amplifying our episodes.